Have you ever wondered why sometimes it feels like God has isolated you from the world? It's a question that has puzzled many, and the answers are not always easy to find. But perhaps we can find some clues in the concept of divine isolation. Divine isolation, as the name suggests, refers to the idea of being set apart or isolated by a divine power. It's a recurring theme in many religious texts, including the Bible, where we find numerous examples of individuals who were isolated by God, often for reasons that were not immediately clear to them. In the Bible, isolation is not always a punishment or a negative experience. It can be a time of growth, a time of reflection, or even a time of preparation for a significant event or transformation. It's a time when we're called to step back from our everyday lives and focus on our spiritual journey. Consider the story of Moses, for example. Before he could lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, isolated from his people. Or think about Jesus, who spent 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, alone, before he began his public ministry. In both cases, these were not easy periods of time. They were filled with challenges and hardships, but they were also transformative. They were times of preparation, times when these individuals were shaped and molded by God, ready to take on the tasks that lay ahead of them. So when we feel isolated, when we feel as though God has set us apart from the world, it's important to remember these stories. It's important to remember that isolation is not always a negative experience. It can be a time of growth, a time of reflection, a time of preparation. And it's equally important to remember that we're not alone in our isolation. Just as Moses and Jesus were guided and supported by God during their time in the wilderness, so too are we. God is there with us, guiding us, supporting us, shaping us. In the Bible, isolation is often a prelude to a significant transformation. So if you're feeling isolated, take heart. It may just be that you're on the brink of a major transformation. One cannot talk about isolation without mentioning the story of Moses. This iconic figure in the Bible is a prime example of how isolation can lead to a greater purpose. Moses spent 40 years in the desert, a time of solitude that was instrumental in shaping his character and preparing him for his destiny. In this barren wilderness, Moses encountered God in a burning bush, a divine revelation that would not have been possible in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It was in this isolation that Moses learned of his mission to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. This period of solitude was not a punishment, but a time of preparation, a time for Moses to grow in his relationship with God and to gain the courage and wisdom he would need to fulfill his extraordinary mission. But Moses is not the only biblical character who experienced isolation. Consider Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers and spent years in an Egyptian prison. This was a time of extreme isolation, yet it was also a time of growth. In the solitude of his prison cell, Joseph found favor with God and was eventually elevated to a position of power, enabling him to save his family and many others from a severe famine. Then there's Elijah the prophet, who was led by God into the wilderness where he was alone, yet not alone because God was with him. This period of isolation was a time for Elijah to learn to trust God in a deeper way. These stories show that isolation is often a time of preparation for a greater purpose. It's a time to grow, to learn to trust God, and to prepare for the tasks that lie ahead. In the quiet, away from the distractions of the world, we can hear God's voice more clearly and understand His purpose for our lives. So the next time you find yourself feeling isolated, remember the biblical examples of Moses, Joseph, and Elijah. Remember that sometimes we are isolated not as a punishment, but as preparation for greater things to come. These stories show that isolation is often a time of preparation for a greater purpose. So, why does God isolate us? You may ask. Well, let's dive into this thought, shall we? Isolation, in its core essence, is a period of solitude. It's a time when we are alone with our thoughts, our fears, our hopes, and most importantly, with God. It's a time when the noise of the world dims, and we can hear the whisper of our own souls and the gentle voice of the divine. But what is the purpose of this solitude? Why does God sometimes place us in these quiet corners of life? Well, for starters, isolation can be a catalyst for spiritual growth and personal development. It's like a chrysalis for a butterfly. It's within this cocoon of solitude that we can truly metamorphose, shedding old habits and beliefs that no longer serve us, and embracing new perspectives and understandings. It's a time of deep reflection and introspection, a time to examine our life's journey and realign our path with our purpose and values. Moreover, isolation can be a sacred space for strengthening our relationship with God. It's in the silence that we can truly listen to God's voice, discern His will, and deepen our connection with the divine. It's a time for prayer, meditation, and spiritual nourishment. Additionally, isolation can also be a shield of protection. God, in His infinite wisdom, sometimes isolates us to protect us from harmful influences, to keep us safe from the storms of life. It's like a shepherd guiding his sheep away from the wolves, keeping them safe within the fold of His care. But remember, friends, God's plans are often beyond human understanding. We may not always comprehend the whys and the hows of our isolation. We may even question its necessity. But rest assured, isolation is never without purpose. It's a divine design, a celestial strategy, a heavenly blueprint. It's a part of the grand tapestry of our life, woven with threads of divine love and wisdom. God's plans are often beyond human understanding, but isolation is never without purpose. What can we do when we find ourselves in a period of isolation? This question is not uncommon, especially in times of uncertainty and solitude. The answer lies in the power of trust. Trusting God's plan during periods of isolation is like a beacon of light in the darkest night. Trust in this context is more than just a belief. It's a profound understanding that everything happens for a reason, even if it's beyond our comprehension. It's about surrendering control, acknowledging that while we may not grasp the why of our situation, we can be certain that it is part of a larger divine plan. Equally important is the role of faith and patience. Faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. It is the anchor that keeps us grounded in the stormy seas of isolation. Patience, on the other hand, is the ability to endure hardship with a calm and hopeful spirit. It's the willingness to wait, to endure, to persevere, knowing that in time, the fog will clear. In the face of isolation, maintaining a positive attitude and staying hopeful can be challenging, yet it's crucial. A positive attitude helps us view our circumstances from a different perspective. It encourages us to see the isolation not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for growth, for introspection, for spiritual enlightenment. Hope, meanwhile, is the bridge that connects the present moment with the promise of a better tomorrow. It's the spark that keeps the flame of faith burning bright. So, when we find ourselves in a period of isolation, let's remember to trust, to have faith, to be patient. Let's maintain a positive attitude and stay hopeful, for these are the tools that will help us navigate through these periods of solitude. It's during these challenging times that we must remember to trust in God's plan. For His plan is always perfect, even when it's tough to understand. It's in the trusting that we find peace, strength, and ultimately, the courage to face whatever comes our way. Isolation, as seen in the Bible, is not a punishment, but a period of preparation. We've journeyed through the scriptures, exploring instances of divine isolation, and discovered that these moments are not about abandonment, but rather about growth, transformation, and preparation for a greater purpose. Think back to the figures we discussed. Each of them found themselves in periods of isolation, seemingly cut off from the world, yet they were far from forgotten. Instead, they were in the crucible of God's plan, being molded and shaped for the roles they would eventually play. God's isolation is not a cold, barren desert. It's a nurturing womb where we grow and prepare for our next chapter in life. It's a time where distractions are stripped away, and we're left with our thoughts, our faith, and our God. It's an opportunity to delve deeper into our spiritual journey, to question, to pray, and to listen for that still small voice guiding us on our path. When you find yourself in a period of isolation, remember this: you're not alone. God is with you, nurturing you, preparing you. The isolation is not a test of endurance, but a test of faith. It's not about how long you can withstand being alone, but how much you trust in God's plan during these challenging times. In these moments, lean into your faith, seek solace in the scriptures, pray for guidance and clarity. Remember that this is a time of preparation, a time to grow stronger in your faith and closer to God. Every chapter of our lives is a part of God's grand narrative. Every moment of isolation, every moment of connection, every triumph, and every trial, they all play a part in the divine plan. So let's trust in that plan, even when the path seems uncertain. Remember, when God isolates you, it's not an end, but the beginning of a new chapter. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to get closer to God. Thank you for watching. Before we wrap up, let's look at some interesting facts that connect with our topic today. Did you know that many of the world's greatest thinkers and innovators valued solitude for creativity and breakthroughs? From Newton to Einstein, From Beethoven to Steve Jobs, periods of solitude have been instrumental in their creative processes. Just like these visionaries, we can use our periods of isolation to connect deeper with our thoughts, ideas, and visions. Studies also show that periods of solitude can improve concentration and productivity. Without the constant distractions and interruptions of our busy lives, we can focus on our tasks and goals with greater clarity and efficiency. But it's not just about work. Solitude can also lead to self-discovery and a better understanding of one's own emotions and thoughts. It's a time for introspection, for self-reflection, an opportunity to understand ourselves better. So next time you find yourself in isolation, remember these facts and embrace the opportunity for growth and transformation. Isolation can be a powerful catalyst for personal and spiritual growth, a time to connect deeper with ourselves, with our passions, and with God. So let's not fear isolation, but embrace it as a part of our journey, a part of God's plan. Let's delve into some fascinating facts from the Bible that resonate with our topic today. The Bible often uses the wilderness, a place of isolation, as a symbol of testing and preparation. This is a time where individuals are stripped of their comforts and distractions, forcing them to rely solely on God. It's a time of purification, of preparation for the tasks and challenges that lie ahead. Perhaps the most famous example of this is Jesus. Before beginning his ministry, Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, fasting and praying. This period of isolation wasn't a punishment, but an essential part of his preparation. It was a time to connect deeper with God, to gain strength and clarity for the mission ahead. Another significant figure who experienced a period of isolation was the Apostle Paul. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul didn't immediately begin his ministry. Instead, he spent 3 years in Arabia, a period of isolation, before he began his groundbreaking work. These years were a time of learning and transformation, a time to understand God's plan for him and to prepare for his mission. These facts further emphasize the significance of isolation in spiritual growth and preparation. So next time you find yourself in a period of isolation, remember these biblical examples. Embrace this time as an opportunity for growth, for learning, for preparation. Remember, isolation isn't a punishment, but a part of God's plan, a part of your journey towards spiritual growth and fulfillment.